Morning, guys. This is about 2:08 in the morning Pacific Standard Time. It's the 24th of June, 2021, Thursday. We were John C. What's going on, guys? Something occurred to me that I don't think anybody else anywhere else has been thinking about or even considering, unless you're in one particular country. That a stable government, theoretically, has been keeping a country alive. And I hate to say this, but for a communist country, it's surviving this long. And you guys are going to hate me for saying this, but it's China. Studying its history and world history and how the other countries have been going back and forth with a lot of things. We got conquest, we had conquerors left and right. Um, Going across every damn landscape there is. China has its history of warlords trying to conquer everything, emperors trying to defend everything, or conquering other lands, and discovering it's getting its ass kicked. And for that part, always had a mystique about it because it always kept itself hidden from the outside world, mostly, until we started getting trade routes from the European colony, not the European colonies, but just Europe, going through the Far East to find new trading routes for spices and other things. China also did its own journey, checking out the Far East and some of the islands, setting up colonies and trading throughout the other countries or other landscapes. It was rumored that China was also doing exploration of the Pacific Islands. There was even a hint, it was never proven, that China may have been also on an expedition to the North American continent, but it was never proven. In all of its history, they never had enough stable dynasties or government systems to keep it active until 1921 when they had a communist revolution, making sure there's no foreigners at all in their country and making it totally their own. You can think a guy named Mao Zedong who writes a red book, they call it the Red Book, of a lot of values that he's put into it that to this day has been drilled into their population left and right. And it was supposed to be a small group of people to oversee a larger mass. Well, in order to see the larger mass, you still need a regime to work with it. A tightly controlled regime, a tightly controlled country. Not even allowing anything that Westerners can actually identify. They would trade with people, but they also had invaders to fight off left and right when World War II came around. They were fighting off Japan and its imperial expansion program. It had to call upon the West to protect itself. You know, they didn't like American interference, but they needed help from volunteers. There was no official request made from the U.S. government back in the early 1900s to protect itself from Japanese expansion during the time. And yes, it's written in the history books on this one. But they're trying to get their communist nation established. Now, if you watch the movie The Sand Pebbles, it gives you a loose interpretation of what was going on. The villagers had no choice but to submit to the Communist Party and the communist militias that were out there, gathering its own strength in order to get the revolution worked on and expanded upon to a point where we're now seeing 100 years of a theoretical stable government. I said theoretical because over the last 50 years or more than that, we still had people still striving and yearning to get some freedom for the country like every other democratic country has, or tried to do for its own lifetimes. And they kept saying America is still a shining example, even to this day. So what happened back in the late 80s to early 90s during this time? You ever heard of Tiananmen Square? For those of us in my age bracket, yeah, you have. You've seen it on television. You've read it in Time. You've read it in magazines and newspapers. We're talking about the revolution that happened that just got buried alive. Where thousands upon young Chinese dissidents, they call them, or reactionaries or revolutionaries or traitors to the country, basically, wanted freedom. They even made their own Statue of Liberty. Of course, it had a Chinese face on it, I think, but that's fine. They had their own version of what liberty was supposed to be. Chinese government wouldn't have it. They stomped down on it. They sent in their own militia. They sent in their own tanks into Tiananmen Square. And there was this one guy. Nobody knows who the hell this guy is. There's been no other further records other than a few pictures of this guy climbing on top of a tank, goes up to a muzzle, sticks a flower in it, and there's a driver sticking his head out from the turret. He gives the guy a flower as well. He doesn't want any problems. He wants peace. He stopped a Chinese tank column. Several of these monsters over here. One would crush this guy instantly. This guy got worldwide notoriety right there. And they silenced his ass one way or another. Trying to bury the news of what happened with the democratic upheaval. Anything that happens regarding democracy, anything regarding outside the communist controlled country, has been instantly stomped on. Anything regarding social media has to be carefully monitored. Almost just as bad as dealing with North Korea, except China still likes to have tourists. They like to have money over there. They like to have a little bit of capital going on. They've been having that damn thing for about, 40 years or more. Trying to have a little bit of capitalism. But the problem is when you have capitalism over there, when you have a laissez-faire rolling right in, when you have American companies rolling in or other foreign companies in there, they have their own little ideas of what things should be, but China just says, nope, we're going to mutate it into something else. And despite the fact that they've had dissidents trying to fight for freedom in that country, it still hasn't collapsed on itself. It still has a population problem with certain densities in certain regions. I mean, they do have an overwhelming amount of people in their landmass within their borders, and they still have problems with their neighbors as well. A mutual agreement of sorts with Russia at the time when it was Soviet Union to make sure they didn't try to kill each other or the rest of the world. But they still managed to keep up with their military strength and their aircraft, submarines. Now they've got a space station up in there with 3 astronauts. They're very slow and meticulous in their own way of what they want to get done. We'll see what happens with the space program they've got. We've had a few, but apparently there was a problem with the space shuttle program when we actually had it because we wouldn't allow the Chinese on there for political reasons. So it never happened. But the Russian rockets, yeah, they'll take them up there and back to the International Space Station. But the Russians are getting sick and tired of America, I guess. And contract disputes or politics, maybe all of them at the same time. Russia's moving away from the International Space Station program and going to site up with the Chinese space station. Comrades to the end, huh? Meanwhile, they get to be the watchdog over North Korea and their antics, and they could care less except if it starts embarrassing China for one way reason or another. And China loves to save face one way or another. In order to save face, it's got to take steps necessary one way or another. And that's what we're seeing right now, even in my lifetime. If there's any jailed Chinese dissidents in there trying to fight for freedom, you'll never hear from them again unless you've got people trying to fight and trying to get the word edgewise. Of course, they still have problems with Nepal, still trying to annex that country for their own. And the Nepalese kept saying, "Nope, this is our country, not China." So there's still political problems right there. You're going to be asking me, why am I saying all this stuff? Why am I talking about China? Because pretty shortly, I'm not quite sure what exactly the anniversary date, but it is coming up, that they're going to have 100 years worth of their government still functioning. Now, compare that communist country to other communist countries, and they haven't even got close to that level yet of stability. They've had collapses, they've had rehashes, but they've never had a stable government. Doesn't say I'm fascinated by them in the first place. I still like freedom. My way of talking to people at 2 o'clock in the morning, to explain things to people, it's a luxury. No, it's a freedom that I take not lightly, and I don't take it for granted either, like other people do. They don't understand that our ancestors had fought hard for the freedoms we have right now, that are still being fought over internally a great deal. We may think it's screwed up. We may think that our politicians are screwed up. Or maybe they're totally ultra righteous or something like that. But in our democratic republic that we have, a representative republic, basically, who values democratic ideals of debates being happen concerning about how things one side views and the other side views, and if we can come to a debates, fine. Somewhere's common ground, compromise, we can actually get things going. Not one party, one rule at all, like communist parties would have, like the socialist parties would have, like Russia has, before they have their current democratic country going. It was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. Large mass of several countries bound together on the one large empire. Economic collapse. They're still trying to fight for that, trying to fight against that economic collapse. Even under a quote-unquote democratic rule that's still close to communist at this point. Because if an ironclad ruler still has one party, one ring that rules them all. Then again, you have North Korea, who for a long while has been trying to keep its communist nature still ongoing. And in studying world history in different countries and how things had formed, it gives me a basis of how to look at the world. Political science and how their governments, and how our Western observers look at the government systems, how they're running compared to everyone else's. See, this is what happens when you go to college. You get to actually learn a few things, even at an old age like mine at 55. What the hell? A lot more things learned than I learned about 30 years ago. More than that. So now, we're dealing with a communist country. North Korea has political party inherited left and right. And for some people, they kill their top people, just to keep the cream of the crop. And still, they keep killing their own damn leaders. But they still keep the military ruining everything. Screwed up. Of course, you had the Communist Revolution in Cuba back in the 50s and 60s. Try to have something like an overthrow for that one. CIA bungled it up, also in history books on that, back in the 60s, actually. We came damn close with Russia over one particular communist country having nuclear missiles 90 miles off the shore of Florida. We came damn close to killing everybody with nuclear weapons. The Red Scare was the most political thing going on that scared the living crap out of everybody. In democratic countries, and not to mention the United States. And yes, several countries are theoretically fine with it. There's not much revolutions happening, except for certain military juntas going on. Myanmar is one of those. Indonesia is still having issues with theirs. See, this is the reason why I keep up, or try to keep up with the international news as much as I can, or as best as I can, because even the international news across the waters, thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away from my own damn home shore, will have an impact one way or another. We are still one globe, and we still haven't figured that out yet, have we? We still figure that we're still landlocked with our borders, and we're still going for border wars one way or another over resources, idealism, or people, or God knows what else. When you see a stabilized government system, barely, but still stabilized enough, celebrating 100 years, I hate to say it, but you got to give them credit for trying to keep something going, even though it might insult the living crap out of other people who believe in their political idealism versus one particular country who's celebrating a century. You also have to ask yourself, after our country was formed 100 years later in the 1800s, how did our country look during that time? What was the world's reaction when they heard that America had lasted 100 years? 100 years of democracy without killing itself, without tearing itself apart. It was unheard of for a stabilized government like that. We had regimes coming in different places. But a stabilized government? We celebrated 200 years. And the world's like, awesome, dude. Another 20 or 30 years, I might be able to live long enough, if I can, to see 300-year anniversary of this country. 300-year anniversary. Oh my God. We claimed that 1776 was the birth of our country. It should have been a ratification day concerning our Constitution. Well, we considered 1776 the birth of our country because we had the Declaration of Independence to declare it. So we based it upon that particular date when the Declaration was created as the birth of our country. I'd rather prefer thinking about the Constitution, ratified, that made our country a country. At least a theoretical idea during that time. That was supposed to be lasting a hell of a long while. And to this date, we still got about 50 states. There's still debate whether or not they're going to get a couple more locked into us. There's still debate whether or not we're actually going to have states trying to leave the Union again, like we tried last century. Didn't work out too well, did it? In the court cases, crash and burned. Even in the 1800s, crash and burned. Once again, you're landlocked. But a lot of people wanted to be part of the United States because of the idealism that we had. We were a lasting democracy. We were a lasting government that survived over 250 or 60 some odd years. And you don't think that's an incredible thing? That we lasted this long for our United States of America? And we're still tearing at each other's hearts left and right. We're still having the Civil War going on. We still want to be considered Americans. And sometimes we consider ourselves as Romans. And the problem is with the Roman Empire, they had too many damn shifting of government. Do you have an emperor? Do you have a senate? Do you have an emperor? Do you have a senate? Do you have an emperor and senate? Do you have both? Do you have neither? Again, history. And you can Google it or go to an actual hardcover book and read something about it. I did say hardcover book, not electronic. Not digits and zeros and ones and stuff like that. No, 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 no. A hardcover book you pick up and read with your eyes. If you got eyes to read. Or listen to on audio podcasts. Just stick earbuds or headphones on and listen to it. Of course, it may bore the living crap out of you, put you to sleep. Better yet, go to a college and start learning stuff like this. And then be put to sleep by the professors. Depends if you get a professor who keeps going, no, talks in a monotone voice like this. And you have to keep listening to the talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. Good night. Yeah. But this is why I'm doing this, because in a few short months, we're going to barely acknowledge, if any, in our colonies here, of a Far East adversary, trading adversary, whatever we would call these guys. Do we call them the enemy? Or do we call them trading adversaries or something? But regardless, through their own determination and forceful natures that they have, trying to keep up with their own one party, one rule, one mindset. We should be taking lessons on these guys. We should. Especially when we have our voting rights being screwed around left and right in the states. And again, I blame people for that one. We've allowed our politicians, and I blame the people for that one as well, because we have allowed to have crooked politicians over there to screw them over one way or another and lie to them. Welcome to democracy. And they want to have one party to have a voice. That's why I keep associating with the Communist Party or Socialist Party, because our country was not based on that. We were supposed to be based on pluralism. Are we now going to be losing our democratic voice? Are we going to be losing our freedom as well? That's why I keep suggesting we're like Russia or like China, coming into that particular viewpoint. We must have duality. We must have plurality. We must have the plurality in our country, because this is the basis of our democracy, a representative democracy, not just one party, one group of people saying yay, 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 and be fanatical. Did we also turn into fanatics of Italy back in the 30s and 40s? 1930s and 1940s? Keep this in mind. We're getting close to it. And I'm not saying that the votes were miscounted. What I'm saying is we're not paying attention enough what the hell's going on. We're also having extremism tearing us apart left and right. It's supposed to be healthy in our country to have debates going on, what differences we have. But it's in those debates, it's in those differences that somewhere we find the common ground. We find a compromise in order to get things going in Congress, to get things going in our government systems, to get things what we need to keep going. It's not just one party. It's not one mindset. Of course, if we're going to have one mindset, everyone keeps saying, well, the United States is the greatest country. We don't even know what our country is anymore. I don't care what the other people say. We don't know because we lost it. We have to go back to our roots. We have to go back to the roots. We have to understand our roots, where we came from, where we started from. And then try to think, how did we diverge? Is the divergence right now healthy for our country to survive further? Or are we going to be changing into some other regime that we fail to see until it hits us? Venezuela keeps reminding me of that too much. Venezuela was one of those oil-rich countries in Central America, bordering on, actually on the South American continent. They depended upon their oil reserves greatly for their economy. But they've also had a corrupt political system that was supposed to be democratic. Only the elites could vote, not the regular people. Only the elites would be counted, not the regular people. So they keep voting in their elitism. They keep voting in for corruption at this point over here, what we call corruption these days. Oh, massive expenditures, massive spending at this point over here. Market collapse concerning about the oil reserves. We have food shortages, riots going on. The people tried to get their own president elected as an interim and not even officially recognized as much. So, yeah. And we still haven't heard anything what's happening with Venezuela for months and months at a time. Because we've been so consumed about our own internal politics. Everything in the other countries will have one way or another effect on our own country. We are one planet. We are global. We have a global influence on everybody, and everybody has a global influence on us. And nobody sees this. For our trading, for our defense, for our livelihood, for environmental reasons that affects everybody. Do we not see this? And yes, I shifted a little bit thing over here, but I'm trying to show you how things abroad affects us here. World wars happened in the 1900s that affected us over here. It affected our trade, affected our defense, affected our lives. We didn't care about the environment during that time. But everything we held dear was being affected. We even had our shorelines attacked. We had our shorelines monitored and ships torpedoed off our own damn coastline. Again, east and west. Check the history books. So this is why I talk about stuff like this. This is why I talk about the politics, because it usually affects us everybody. That's why I'm talking about history of one particular country is going to be turning about 100 years. That's the only thing I admire about the damn thing. It was stable enough under its own forceful regime to stay alive this long without it falling apart completely like every other damn regime. Because they've got an ironclad control on it. And they've got an ironclad mindset. That just scares the hell out of me. And some of the people still want to get the hell out of there and go for the chaotic Western civilizations. Go figure. Anyway, this is Morning of Thought right here for you, ain't it?